The wind screamed across the open land, tearing at Mara Ellison's threadbare shawl as if trying to rip the last bit of warmth from her body. She tightened her grip on Eli's small hand, her fingers stiff from cold and exhaustion. The boy stumbled beside her, his worn-out boots kicking up little puffs of dust with each step. His face was too pale, his lips chapped from days without enough water. They had been walking for so long. Every farmhouse they'd come to had turned them away. Every town had been full of hard eyes and closed doors. Mara's stomach growled, empty and aching, but she ignored it. She had to keep moving. Behind them was the man who had tried to make them work like slaves, who had taken the last coins from her pocket and laughed when she begged. Ahead of them, she didn't know what was ahead. Only more dust, more wind, more nothing. Eli tugged weakly at her hand. "Mama," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I can't walk no more." Her heart cracked, but she forced herself to stand straight, to be strong for him. "Just a little farther, sweetheart," she murmured, though she wasn't sure it was true. Her own legs shook beneath her. The world swayed in front of her eyes. Then, through the blur of her weariness, she saw it, a crooked line of barbed wire cutting across the prairie. A fence, and beyond it, a barn with sun-bleached wood and a sagging roof. And a man. He stood beside the barn, tall and still, watching them. Even from this distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze. Was he another person who would turn them away? Or worse? Mara swallowed hard. She had no choice. She took another step forward, and her knees buckled. Eli's cry was the last thing she heard before the ground rushed up to meet her. Darkness swallowed her whole. Silas Boone had seen them coming long before they reached his fence. From the shadow of his barn, he watched the woman and the boy struggle across the prairie, their steps slow and unsteady. He hadn't had visitors in years, not since the whispers about his land being cursed started, not since Lena left. Most folks in town avoided his property, and he preferred it that way. Less trouble, less pain. But now here they were. Woman too thin, her dress worn to rags, and a child who looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Silas clenched his jaw. He should turn away, should let them pass by like everyone else had. Then the woman collapsed. The boy dropped to his knees beside her, shaking her shoulder, his small voice cracking as he cried, "Mama, Mama, wake up." Silas's chest tightened. He had seen that kind of fear before, in his own daughter's eyes, the last time he'd spoken to her before she disappeared. Before he could stop himself, he was striding across the field, his boots kicking up dust. The boy looked up as Silas approached, his face streaked with dirt and tears. "Please," the child whispered. "Help her." Silas didn't answer. He just bent down, slid one arm under the woman's shoulders, the other beneath her knees, and lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp in his arms. The boy scrambled to his feet, clinging to Silas's sleeve like he was afraid to let go. Silas carried her toward the house, the boy trailing behind. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the dim light inside revealing a cabin that hadn't seen company in too long. Dust coated the table. The hearth was cold. He laid the woman on the bed in the spare room, the one that had been Lena's. The boy climbed up beside her, clutching her hand. Silas turned away. "I'll get water," he muttered. He meant to leave it at that. Just water. Just enough to get them on their feet and gone. But as he filled the cup from the pitcher, he caught sight of the boy's face again. Too young to look so tired. Too small to carry so much fear. Silas set the cup on the table with a thud. Just for the night, he told himself. But deep down, he already knew it wouldn't be that simple. Mara woke to the smell of wood smoke and the soft crackle of a fire. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The bed beneath her was firm, the blanket rough but warm. Then she turned her head and saw Eli curled beside her, his breathing even in sleep. Memory rushed back. The endless walking. The fence. The man. She sat up too fast, her head spinning. The room was small but clean, the walls bare except for a single nail where a picture might have once hung. A pitcher of water sat on a stool beside the bed. Mara reached for it, her throat so dry it hurt. The door creaked open. The man from the field stood there, his broad shoulders blocking most of the light from the main room. He didn't smile, didn't speak right away, just studied her with eyes that had seen too much. "You're awake," he finally said. His voice was low, rough like gravel. Mara nodded. "Thank you for helping us." The man grunted. Didn't have much choice. She swallowed. "We won't trouble you long. Just need to rest a bit, then we'll be on our way." The man crossed his arms. "Name's Silas Boone. This is my land, and there are rules if you're staying here." Mara straightened. "What kind of rules?" "No questions about my business," he said. "No wandering where you don't belong, and no expecting more than I'm willing to give." Mara held his gaze. She had lived under worse conditions. "We can abide by that." Silas gave a short nod. "There's stew on the stove. Eat, then the boy can help me with the chickens." Eli stirred at the sound of his voice, blinking sleepily. "Chickens." Silas didn't smile, but something in his expression softened, just a little. "If you're staying, you're working." Eli sat up, his eyes wide. "Yes, sir." Mara watched as Silas turned and walked out, his boots heavy on the floorboards. She should have been wary, should have been planning their next move. But for the first time in months, she felt something like safety. It wouldn't last. She knew that. But for now it was enough. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the cabin floor as Mara stirred the pot of oatmeal over the stove. 3 days had passed since Silas carried her through his door, and though he still spoke little, the sharp edges of his silence had softened slightly. Eli sat at the rough-hewn table, swinging his legs as he watched Silas mend a harness by the window. Mara's gaze drifted to the mantel above the fireplace, where a single photograph sat framed in worn wood. A young girl with braided hair and serious eyes stared back Lena. Silas's daughter, the one everyone whispered about in town, the one who disappeared. She had noticed how Silas's hands stilled whenever he passed that picture, how his shoulders tensed just before he turned away. It was a grief Mara recognized, the kind that hollowed a person out and left them staring at empty spaces where laughter used to be. "Need more firewood," Silas announced abruptly, sitting aside the harness. Eli jumped up immediately, eager to help. The boy had taken to following Silas like a shadow, soaking up every gruff instruction about chores like they were precious gifts. As the door closed behind them, Mara approached the mantel. Her fingers hovered near the frame, but didn't touch. The girl in the photograph couldn't have been more than 14. There was a stubborn set to her jaw that reminded Mara of Eli when he was determined. The cabin door banged open, making Mara jump. Silas stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes locked on her near the photograph. A storm passed over his face, anger, pain, then resignation. "Her birthday was last week," he said suddenly, his voice rough. 16. Mara's breath caught. She didn't ask where Lena was, didn't pry about what happened, just nodded slowly. "Birthdays are hard. My husband's was 2 months after." She trailed off, swallowing against the lump in her throat. Silas studied her for a long moment before stepping fully inside. "The north field needs plowing," he muttered, changing the subject. But something had shifted. When he looked at the photograph this time, his eyes held less bitterness, more sorrow. Eli burst in then, arms overloaded with kindling. "Look how much I got, Mama." As the boy chattered excitedly, Mara caught Silas watching them with an expression she couldn't name, something between longing and fear. She turned back to the stove, giving him his privacy. Some griefs needed to be carried quietly. The rhythmic squeak of the pump handle filled the morning air as Mara drew water for the wash basin. 2 weeks had woven them into the rhythm of Silas's homestead, Mara taking over the cooking and mending, Eli becoming Silas's shadow, and Silas, well, he spoke more now. Not much, but enough. Eli's laughter rang out from the chicken coop, where he helped Silas gather eggs. The sound made Mara pause, her hands stilling in the soapy water. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard her boy laugh like that, carefree and bright. Inside the cabin, Mara found herself humming as she darned a tear in one of Silas's shirts. The fabric was worn but clean, the stitches neat under her fingers. It felt good to be useful again, to have a purpose beyond mere survival. The door opened, and Silas entered with Eli close behind, the boy carefully cradling 3 brown eggs in his hands. "Only broke one today," Silas announced, which from him might as well have been high praise. Eli beamed. "Silas says I can help milk the cow tomorrow." Mara smiled, but her attention caught on the way Silas hesitated near the mantel, his fingers brushing the edge of Lena's picture before pulling away. That afternoon, as Mara kneaded bread dough at the table, Silas surprised her by sitting across from her rather than retreating to the barn. He watched her work for several minutes before speaking. "I'm riding into town tomorrow," he said abruptly. Mara kept her eyes on the dough. "Need anything while you're there?" "Just supplies." But the way his fingers tapped the table told her there was more. Eli, playing with a carved wooden horse by the hearth, looked up. "Can I come?" Silas shook his head. "Not this time." His eyes met Mara's briefly. "I'll be back by sundown." That night, after Eli was asleep, Mara found Silas on the porch staring at the stars. She handed him a cup of coffee and stood beside him in comfortable silence. "Her hair ribbon was yellow," he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "The day she left. I told her she couldn't go to that dance. Said she was too young." He swallowed hard. "Last thing I said to her was no." Mara didn't offer empty comforts. Just touched his sleeve lightly before going back inside. Some wounds needed air to heal. The next morning, Silas left before dawn. Mara watched from the window as he rode away, his posture straighter than she'd seen before, like a man with purpose. Eli tugged her sleeve. "Do you think we can stay here, Mama?" Mara looked around the cabin, at the mended curtains, the swept floor, the warm hearth, at the empty space on the wall where another picture might someday hang. "I think," she said softly, "we already are." The church bell tolled in the distance as Silas stepped inside the whitewashed building, his hat clutched tightly in his hands. He hadn't set foot in a church since Lena disappeared, hadn't seen the point in praying to a God who let children walk out of their homes and never return. But the lead had been too specific to ignore. A girl with auburn braids, last seen wearing a yellow ribbon, attending services here. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the pews in patches of color. Silas slid into a back row, his eyes scanning the congregation. Farmers in their Sunday best, women with baskets at their feet, children fidgeting beside their parents. Then he saw her. Near the front, a girl turned slightly to whisper to her neighbor, and the movement made the yellow ribbon in her hair catch the light. Silas's breath stopped. The braids, the slope of her shoulders. It couldn't be. The congregation rose to sing, blocking his view. When they sat again, the girl was gone. Silas nearly knocked over a pew in his haste to reach the aisle. He pushed through the church doors into the bright afternoon, his head swiveling frantically. A flash of yellow disappeared around the corner of the general store. He ran. By the time he reached the storefront, the girl was nowhere to be seen. His shoulders slumped. Maybe it hadn't been Lena after all. Maybe his eyes were playing tricks. Looking for someone? Silas turned to find an elderly woman watching him from the store's porch, her hands busy shelling peas into a bowl. A girl, he rasped. About 16. Auburn hair. Yellow ribbon. The woman's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You mean Lena from the sewing shop?" She pointed down the street. "Works for Mrs. Calloway. Came to town about 3 months back. Quiet thing." Silas's heart pounded. Lena. It had to be. He found the shop with its faded dressmaker's dummy in the window. Through the glass, he saw a young woman bent over a sewing machine, her fingers flying across fabric. The yellow ribbon lay beside her like a discarded thought. When the bell jingled over the door, she looked up and froze. Her eyes, Lena's eyes, widened in recognition. Silas couldn't move, couldn't speak. The room tilted around him. The girl's lips trembled. "Papa." The first drops of rain pattered against the cabin roof as Mara tucked the quilt tighter around Eli's shoulders. Silas had been gone 2 days now, longer than he'd said. She tried not to watch the road, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. Mama. Eli's small voice broke the silence. Is Silas coming back? Mara smoothed his hair. Of course he is. The words came easier than the certainty behind them. Eli fiddled with a loose thread on the quilt. Is he mad at us? No, sweetheart. He just had business in town. The boy was quiet for a long moment. Then, are we going to stay here forever? The question hung in the air like the charged moment before lightning strikes. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. Do you want to stay? Eli nodded vigorously. Silas teaches me things, and there's always enough to eat here. His face clouded. Not like with Mr. Harlow. Mara's stomach clenched at the name. She told Eli they'd left because Mr. Harlow was mean, but not how close they'd come to being trapped forever in that debt-ridden farmhouse. Not about the way Harlow's eyes had followed her when he thought no one was looking. She took Eli's hands in hers. Listen to me. What Mr. Harlow did, keeping our pay, saying we owed him money, that wasn't right. But we're safe now. Eli's lower lip trembled. He said he'd hurt you if I told. Mara pulled him close, her heart hammering. She hadn't realized Eli had carried that fear all this way. No one will hurt us here, she whispered into his hair. Silas won't let them. The words surprised her even as she said them. When had she started trusting the gruff rancher to keep them safe? Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. Somewhere in the storm, Silas was riding home. Mara wondered what, or who, he might be bringing with him. Eli yawned against her shoulder. If we stay, does that mean Silas is family now? Mara stared at the empty mantel where Lena's picture usually sat. I don't know, she said honestly, but I think maybe we could be. As the storm raged outside, she held her son and watched the road, waiting for the shape of a man and a girl to emerge from the rain. The sewing shop smelled of starch and lavender, the sharp scent of new cloth mixing with the oil from the sewing machines. Silas stood frozen just inside the doorway, rainwater dripping from his hat brim onto the wooden floor. The girl at the back table, Lena, the shop owner had called her, had gone pale as milk, her hands stilled on the fabric she'd been hemming. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then her chair scraped back as she stood, her fingers clutching the edge of the table. Silas took one step forward, then another. His boots sounded too loud in the quiet shop. Lena, his voice cracked like dry kindling. The girl swayed slightly. She looked older than he remembered. Thinner. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was her. It was really her. Mrs. Calloway bustled in from the back room, her smile fading as she took in the scene. Lena, is everything? I need to speak with my daughter, Silas managed to say. Alone. Understanding dawned on the woman's face. She nodded and retreated, closing the curtain behind her with a soft swish. Lena's chest rose and fell rapidly. You came looking for me. It wasn't a question. Silas swallowed hard. Every day. His hands ached to reach for her, but he kept them at his sides. I followed every lead, every rumor. Tears welled in Lena's eyes, but didn't fall. I wrote you a letter, left it with Pastor Higgins to give you once I was settled. I never got it. The words tasted bitter. Someone had kept that letter from him, just like someone had surely fed the rumors about his land being cursed. Lena twisted the fabric between her fingers. I thought when you didn't come. Silas couldn't stand it anymore. In 3 strides he crossed the room and gathered her into his arms. She stiffened at first, then collapsed against him with a sob that shook them both. I'm sorry. She wept into his shirt. I just want to go to that dance. I didn't mean. Hush now. He stroked her hair, the familiar weight of her head against his shoulder unlocking something in his chest. None of that matters now. When she finally pulled back, wiping her cheeks, Silas cupped her face. Come home, he said simply. Lena glanced around the shop, at the life she'd built these past months. Then she nodded. Let me get my things. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Silas and Lena rode up to the cabin. Mara heard the horses first and hurried to the window, her breath fogging the glass. Eli crowded beside her, his small body vibrating with excitement. "There's a girl with him." Eli pressed his nose against the pane. Mara's pulse quickened. This was it. The moment Silas either reclaimed his family or realized there wasn't room in it for strangers. She smoothed her skirts nervously as the door opened. Silas entered first, his face unreadable. Then the girl, Lena, stepped hesitantly over the threshold. She had her father's strong jaw but her mother's delicate features. Mara guessed. Her eyes darted around the cabin, lingering on the mantel where her picture usually sat. Eli broke the silence first. "Hi, I'm Eli. Do you like chickens? Your papa lets me feed them." A startled laugh escaped Lena. "Ah, yes, I like chickens." Mara stepped forward, keeping her movements slow. "I'm Mara. We've been staying here a while." She trailed off, unsure how to finish. Lena studied her with a gaze far older than 16. "Papa told me about you and your boy." Her voice held no resentment, only quiet curiosity. Silas hovered near the door, his shoulders tense. Mara recognized that look, a man braced for rejection. Eli solved the problem by grabbing Lena's hand. "Come see the nest we found in the barn. There's 4 eggs." Lena allowed herself to be tugged toward the door, throwing a bewildered glance at her father over her shoulder. Silas nodded slightly, and she followed Eli out into the damp evening. The silence in their wake was heavy. Mara busied herself with the stew pot. "She's lovely," she offered. Silas exhaled shakily. "I didn't know if she'd come." Mara stirred the stew, watching the carrots swirl. She came. That night, they ate around the table, 4 of them now instead of 3. Eli chattered endlessly. Lena smiled shyly at her father's jokes, and Mara caught Silas looking at each of them in turn like a man counting blessings. When the fire burned low and the children slept, Eli in his cot, Lena in her old room, Mara found Silas on the porch staring at the stars again. "Thank you," he said without turning. Mara leaned against the railing beside him. "For what?" "For being here when we came home." The word home settled warm in Mara's chest. She didn't reply, didn't need to. The understanding between them was as quiet and sure as the moon rising over the prairie. Inside, through the window, they could see Eli had crept into Lena's room, his small form curled at the foot of her bed like a loyal pup. Lena's hand rested protectively on his shoulder. Silas reached over and squeezed Mara's hand just once before going inside. Mara stayed a moment longer, listening to the night sounds of the land that had somehow become theirs. The cabin door stood open behind her, light spilling out onto the grass like a welcome. The first snowflakes of winter dusted the barn roof as Mara kneaded bread dough at the kitchen table. Through the window, she watched Lena patiently show Eli how to check the chicken coop for drafts, the girl's hands moving with quiet confidence as she guided the boy's smaller fingers along the wooden slats. 3 weeks had passed since Lena's return, and the rhythm of their days had settled into something warm and familiar. Mornings began with Lena humming at the stove while Mara braided her hair, just as Lena's mother used to do. She confessed one evening. Silas had taken to teaching Eli his letters after supper, the big man's calloused finger moving slowly beneath each word while the boy sounded them out. The cabin door burst open, letting in a flurry of cold air and an excited Eli. "Mama, Lena says I can help make the winter shelters for the rabbits." His cheeks were pink with cold, his eyes bright. Mara smiled, brushing flour from her hands. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Lena followed him in, shaking snow from her shawl. "He's a quick learner," she said, and the pride in her voice made Eli beam. Silas entered last, his arms loaded with firewood. He set it carefully by the hearth, his gaze lingering on the scene. Mara at the table, Lena helping Eli with his boots, the warm golden light of the oil lamps chasing shadows from the corners. "Storm's coming," he said, nodding toward the window where the sky had darkened. "Big one." Mara followed his gaze. "We're ready." And they were. The pantry shelves groaned with preserves and salted meat. Every quilt in the house had been mended. The animals were snug in their shelters. As if to prove her point, Lena pulled a pan of molasses cookies from the oven, Eli's favorite. The boy whooped, dancing around the table as the sweet, spicy scent filled the cabin. Silas caught Mara's eye and did something rare. He smiled. Not the half-smile he sometimes gave Eli's antics, but a real, full smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Mara's breath caught. Later, when the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Silas remained at the table, studying a piece of paper. Mara sat across from him. "What is it?" He turned the paper toward her. A crude but careful drawing of the homestead, signed in Eli's sprawling letters. 4 stick figures stood before the cabin. A tall one with a hat, a woman with an apron, a girl with braids, and a small boy between them. "Our place," Silas said softly, tracing the lines with one finger. Mara's throat tightened. Not his place. Not her and Eli's temporary shelter. Their place. All of theirs. The wind howled outside, but inside, the fire crackled, and the walls stood strong against the coming storm. The storm hit at midnight with the force of a runaway train. Mara woke to the cabin shuddering under the assault of wind, the timbers groaning like a living thing. Across the room, Eli sat bolt upright in bed, his eyes wide with fear. Before Mara could reach him, a tremendous crack split the air, followed by the splintering crash of the barn door tearing loose. Silas was already pulling on his boots when Mara rushed into the main room. The animals. Lena appeared from her bedroom, her braids flying as she grabbed her coat. "I'm coming too," Mara said, shrugging into her heaviest shawl. Silas opened his mouth, probably to argue, when another gust shook the house hard enough to rattle the dishes in the cupboard. He nodded grimly. "Eli stays inside." The boy protested, but one look from Silas silenced him. "Guard the house," the big man said, and Eli squared his small shoulders, nodding solemnly. Outside, the world had turned white and howling. Snow stung Mara's face like needles as she fought her way toward the barn, the wind threatening to knock her off her feet. Through the swirling chaos, she saw Silas wrestling with the broken barn door while Lena darted inside to calm the panicked horses. Mara made for the chicken coop, her heart sinking when she saw the roof had partially collapsed. Feathers flew everywhere as terrified chickens flapped in confusion. She grabbed the nearest, tucking the squirming bird under her arm while reaching for another. A high-pitched scream cut through the storm. Mara's blood turned to ice. "Eli!" She dropped the chickens and ran, slipping and stumbling through the snow. Silas and Lena were right behind her. The cabin door stood open, swinging wildly in the wind. "No, Eli! Eli!" Mara's voice broke with terror. Then, a small figure appeared at the edge of the pasture, barely visible through the snow. He was chasing something. Bella got out. Eli's voice was thin against the wind. The old milk cow had wandered through the broken fence, her tail whipping in the storm. Silas reached the boy first, scooping him up with one arm while grabbing the cow's trailing rope with the other. Lena appeared on Bella's other side, herding the confused animal back toward the barn. Mara gathered Eli into her arms, his small body shaking with cold and fear. "I had to help Bella," he sobbed into her neck. "I know, baby. I know." Mara pressed her face into his hair, her own tears freezing on her cheeks. Back inside, with the door bolted against the storm and the animals as secure as they could make them, Silas built up the fire while Lena wrapped Eli in blankets. Mara heated milk with shaking hands, pouring cups for everyone. No one spoke of the close call. No one needed to. As they sat around the hearth for damp, exhausted souls, Silas reached out and placed a hand on Eli's head, then Lena's shoulder, finally letting his fingers brush Mara's wrist. The storm still raged outside, but here, in this moment, they were all safe. All together. Eli broke the silence first, his voice still shaky but brave. "We didn't lose anybody." Silas met Mara's eyes over the children's heads. "No," he said firmly, "we didn't." And Mara knew, whatever came next, whatever challenges awaited them when the snow melted, this family that had been forged in hardship would face it together. No one left behind. Not ever again. The morning after the storm dawned crisp and bright, sunlight glinting off the fresh snow like scattered diamonds. Mara stood at the cabin window, watching Silas and Eli repair the barn door, their breath making little clouds in the cold air. Behind her, Lena hummed softly as she kneaded dough for the noon meal, the sound as warm and comforting as the fire crackling in the hearth. Mara's fingers brushed the simple gold band on her left hand, new and slightly unfamiliar still. Just yesterday, in the quiet of the snow-blanketed church, with only the preacher and a few neighbors as witnesses, Silas had taken her hands in his and promised to love and cherish her until the end of his days. She'd sworn the same, her voice barely above a whisper as Eli beamed beside them, proudly holding the rings, and Lena wiped happy tears from her cheeks. It hadn't been a fancy wedding, no lace or flowers, just four souls who had found each other against all odds, choosing to make official what their hearts had already decided. The cabin door opened, bringing in a gust of cold air and the sound of Eli's excited chatter. "Mama, we fixed it. Silas says I hammered real good." Silas followed, his work gloves still on, snow dusting his shoulders. His eyes found Mara's, and that quiet, steady look they shared now passed between them, a language all their own. Lena set the loaf in the oven and wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll set the table." As she moved about the kitchen, Mara noticed how naturally Lena took charge now, no longer the skittish girl who'd returned from town months ago. This was her home as much as anyone's. The noontime meal was simple: warm bread, honey from their own bees, thick slices of ham, and potatoes roasted in the coals. But as they took their places around the table, Silas at the head, Mara to his right, Lena and Eli across from them, the ordinary food tasted like a feast. Eli said grace, as he'd taken to doing lately. "Thank you, God, for our family and our home. And thank you for the snow, so we could all stay inside together today." Silas reached for Mara's hand under the table, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. She looked around at their faces, Silas with his quiet strength, Lena growing into her mother's gentle beauty, Eli with his endless curiosity and joy. This was the miracle, Mara thought, not just surviving the storms, but finding your people to weather them with, not just building a house, but making a home, not just loving, but being loved in return. Silas squeezed her hand, as if he knew her thoughts. Outside, the winter sun shone bright on the snow. Inside, the fire burned warm, and four hearts beat together around one sturdy table. Thank you for joining Mara, Silas, Lena, and Eli on their journey of love, healing, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others who might need its message of hope. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt historical tales of faith, family, and fresh beginnings. Leave a comment below about which moment moved you most. Until next time, may your fences stand strong against life's storms, and your table always have room for one more.